So this video is going to be a quick little tutorial about how to write PEs for the forthcoming controlled assessment on of mice and men. This little image here, this little video is just trying to portray the fact that we want you going in really confident, and from this video hopefully you'll go in very confident about what you're going to write in your controlled assessment. So first of all, here's our title. So this title is just for Steve's class. If you were in any other English class at the college, or any colleges, you will have a different controlled assessment title probably. However, they are all basically a presentation of Curly's wife. So all the things that you learn in this video, you can probably, well, or definitely use for your own controlled assessment. So apart from your introduction and conclusion, most of your other paragraphs are going to be point, evidence, explain. So if you follow this structure, you're going to be on the road to success. Obviously, we don't just want to stick with PE. We want to elaborate and go into more detail, but this is the basic structure of PE. So you've got your point, which is basically should be one sentence or a little bit more than one sentence, and all you're doing is making a simple point based on the question. So Curly is an aggressive character. Your evidence, which you should embed into the sentence, Curly lashed his body around. So I've used this quote to prove my point that Curly is aggressive, and then all I'm doing in my explanation is basically describing or analysing why Curly lashed his body around, why that portrays Curly as aggressive. So if you did that, that's sort of PE, you'd be looking at a C all the way through. Obviously, maybe a low C, we'd want a bit more detail, but that sort of structure would get you a low C perhaps. However, if you didn't do it all the way through correctly, or you made some mistakes, or you didn't do enough, you're going to be maybe playing with the fact that you might be on the CD borderline, and we want to make sure that people are at least getting Cs. So there's a couple of ways to improve the paragraph. One of the ways is by zooming in on a word in the quotation. So this means I look at my quotation, Curly lashed his body around, and I look at any words and think, well, what can I say? How do they prove my point? So for example, in this paragraph, we could look at the word lashed. John Steinbeck could have just said, Curly moved his body around. However, the use of the word lashed, the verb, makes it sound like a violent and aggressive action. So that's why Curly is an aggressive character, my point. The other way is to talk about 1930s America or context. You might not be able to talk about 1930s America in every single paragraph, but you should be able to do it in most. So if we look at a perfect A grade paragraph, we basically got the sentence or the paragraph that I've just mentioned ago. So that would be your C, low C. So I've got a point, I've got evidence, and I've got explanation. If I zoomed in on the language, the word or the verb lashed suggests he's quick and angry, that would be looking at a B. And if I added a little bit more deeper understanding of the novel and of the characters, I'll be looking at A. The way Steinbeck introduces Curly as an aggressive character at such an early stage of the novel suggests to the reader he will be a troublemaker. So you could maybe mention the fact that maybe foreshadows the fact that Curly will be an aggressive or a troublemaker throughout the novella. What I did in my class was I showed 3 different quotes, and I got my students to come up with a point for each one. So a simple point you can make for this one is that Curly's wife is presented as a sex object. This is when she's being cruel to Crooks, so you could say Curly's wife is presented as a bully in chapter 4. So it's quite good to mention where your quote is from in the book, if you can use a page reference or you can just tell me the chapter. Remember, our title was How is she presented, so you want to keep mentioning that. This is just after Curly's wife is sort of beaten Candy in a battle of a bit of an argument in chapter 4. Maybe the point you can make here is that Curly's wife has power over the, in quotes, weaker characters. Place then, nigger, I could get you strung up on a tree so easy it ain't even funny. So I've got my point, I've got my evidence, I've just got to write my explanation. So like I said before, the first part of the explanation is just saying why that quote proves she's cruel. And basically it's cruel because she's threatening to get him lynched and killed. So she's saying to Crooks, if you don't keep your mouth shut, keep your place, I will get you killed. So it's a pretty horrendous thing to someone to say something. So how do we improve this? So we zoom in. So one phrase we could zoom in is your place. So why is John Steinbeck saying that? So we could say it's because she's telling Crooks to keep his place on the ranch at the bottom, and also a black person's place in society at the bottom. We could also zoom in on the N-word. So although this was commonplace in 1930s America, we could definitely maybe comment on the fact that it's still meant as an insult. And we could also zoom in on so easy. So we could maybe comment on the fact that it wouldn't be a hard thing for her to get him lynched. She could literally do it as easy as clicking her fingers. Then we could talk about 1930s, explain what lynching was and how it was commonplace. And we could also talk about how maybe women were bullied in the 1930s, so maybe that's why she's bullying the other characters. We could also talk about Crooks, the 1930s, the place of the black man in 1930s American society. So one bit of a trick that I've told my students to do perhaps in the controlled assessment is almost set your work out like I'm just going to set out here, and then just before you print out, take away the subheadings. So my point is Curly's wife shows her cruel side in chapter 4. My evidence is the one I've already said. My explanation is Curly's wife is suggesting she will get Crooks lynched if he continues talking to her. My zoom in, the so easy phrasing makes it sound like she can make it happen as easily as breathing in and out, while the keep your place suggests she wants him never to forget his place in society and the ranch as a black man. She also calls him a nigger, and while this might not be considered racist in 1930s America, we sense she's using it as an insult. So to finish the paragraph, we're going to talk about context. In the 1930s, black men would have been hanged from a tree if they were accused of a crime. There would have been no judge or jury, but they would have just been killed on a white person's accusation. They were hanged from a tree as a punishment, as a warning to other people. So all I've done in that paragraph is I've gone through each of these numbers here, all the zoom in, all the explanation, and basically I've just done one sentence for each one. So although this paragraph might look scary, all it is for one sentence for each of the things I've said. And then what you do is at the end of your controlled assessment, before you print it out, you would just take away all the subheadings and it would end up something like that. A really good A star or A grade PEE paragraph, but with greater depth, talking about zoom in and context. If we go through one more, well, I think Curly's married a tart. My point is going to be we have a biased or unfair view of Curly's wife before we even meet her, because this quote comes from Candy in chapter 2, and it's before we are introduced to the character. This is just a rumour that Candy's told us. So first thing we do is we say why that quote proves that we get a biased view. So explain why it's influences. So we could say for this one that as the reader has not met Curly's wife yet, this sexual term influences the reader to think Curly's wife is sexual, a treat and trustworthy. So it's almost like I've just explained what the word tart and the connotations that has. So if we go back, so if we zoom in, so what can we zoom in on this time? So we could zoom in on the word think. So we could say this is Candy's opinion. He's not saying it's 100% fact. Because he's saying he thinks it, we could almost say, well, he's not totally sure. So maybe John Steinbeck is saying that we shouldn't be totally sure what we're hearing. We could also zoom in on the 3 dots of the ellipsis. Normally if this happens it means a pause. So you need to think to yourself, well, why is he pausing? He's basically having a go or name calling the boss's son's wife. So maybe he'd be worried that maybe Curly's listening. He maybe would get in trouble. He might get sacked if he was overheard. We could also zoom in on the tart, which we've already done. And then we can talk about 1930s America. Remember, we've already said in lessons that Candy's a lonely man. He's trying to impress George and Lenny, so maybe he seems to be enjoying this bit of gossip. And we've also talked about that Candy is a guide for George and Lenny. He's shown them the bunkhouse, he's shown them the characters, but he's also a guide for the reader. He's telling us about the bunkhouse, he's telling us about the characters. So if we put that into a paragraph, or my subheadings, the point, the reader is a biased view. The evidence, well, I think Curly's married a tart. Explanation, we've already talked about. Then we zoom in. One thing that might count in our favour is that Candy uses the verb think to show he's not 100% sure. The ellipsis could suggest that this is a secret as Candy pauses before saying tart. Candy is a guide to George and Lenny, but he's also a guide to the reader and introducing the characters to the reader. With this, he also introduces how Steinbeck wants us to think of these characters. And then context, Candy's a lonely guy in 1930s. He doesn't have a family. And in society at that time, the elderly and disabled were left with no support. So this might explain why he's so eager to share this gossip. So again, all I've done is I've written my bullet points into a paragraph, 1 line each. So like I said, although it seems like I've written a lot, all it is a couple of lines, a couple of sentences for each bullet point I've done on the previous slide. And again, you take away the subheadings and it ends up a big paragraph, impressive looking paragraph like that. Okay, here is a selection of points that maybe you could make in the essay. However, this is just for guidance and you should be making your own points and using your own quotations. Feel free to pause this if you'd like to have a look at these points. But like I say, keep in touch with PE, use zoom in, discuss context, make it clear all the way through, and you should come out with a great grade. Good luck with your controlled assessment.